perspective on what we can do to improve the situation here in Austin related to housing, our housing challenges. That report showed that we needed to add 25 to 30 new single family homes a year and work on about 170 rehabilitations of single family homes just to keep our current housing stock online. They highlighted that the annual depreciation of our tax base for single family homes alone is $14 million. So every year that's gone by, we've lost $14 million in taxable value in our city. They highlighted the need to protect our naturally occurring affordable housing, and recommended doing programs and incentives towards those renovations, things like marketing our community better, and address challenges in our multifamily rental housing units, which dovetails well with our rental housing ordinance that has come online in recent years. This whole exercise, the counselors of real estate, we did have some discussion at the last budget session, but this plays well with our communities of practice that Daniel has talked about in other instances where we can bring folks in the community like yourselves to the table to try to solve these ongoing housing challenges. I'll just go ahead and share my screen if that's okay, Daniel.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So Austin is a great place for community for developers to participate and take chances on building single family homes. We've adopted an abatement program for both single family and multifamily. And this is an effort by both the city, county, and school district. So still fairly rare in the state of Minnesota to see all three taxing entities combining to promote development of these single family and multifamily projects. We've had 61 since 2016, and particular interest is those developers that are doing some spec homes. We've seen some good penetration as far as that's concerned, with developers taking on that risk in hopes of having a buyer at the end of the rainbow, and they've been rewarded for that, and then having this be able to limit their risk at least to some extent for doing those spec homes has been a big plus. Average abatements are about $2,400 a year, or $12,000 over the 5 years that the abatement's in place. So that's a pretty significant component to either lower their mortgage payment slightly or invest a little bit more in the home that they're advancing. We've also had interest from the council in advancing an assessment strategy. One of the largest expenses for a developer for residential lots is the infrastructure costs. I'm doing that on a similar basis that we do for our existing street projects, where we can spread those costs over a 15-year period. Council has been initially receptive of that and looking for developers to proceed forward on that plan. And in an ideal circumstance, it could allow the lot sales to cover the assessments of the infrastructure costs. So really trying to limit that big upfront cost for developers as they come into our community. Just generally speaking, Austin's got a real quick turnaround on our permitting process. We do have ample land available for development, and we do take a developer-friendly approach as compared to our peer cities. This is just a map to show you some internal assessment that we've done from the city to really look at infrastructure, where the low-hanging fruit properties could be for more expanded development in the community. So I guess just suffice to say that we are on top of it and looking to partner with developers on where would be an advantageous place to go as far as that infrastructure is concerned. Other good signs in the community, we've had 2 market rate projects go forward for multifamily. Flats on 21 was 82 units. Mill on Main is 91 units. I'll be opening this summer. These market rate apartments, when we're talking about trying to show impetus for growth and development, having market rate being produced in the community, which has been a challenge in a lot of rural communities, is a kind of an Achilles heel, because it opens up the affordable units that are below. To see this strength in the private market is really encouraging. Mill on Main their posted rents that they're looking at for a 1-bedroom, 1-bath is about 1,100. A 2-bedroom, 2-bath is 1,800. So showing some real good market demand. And I know they've already got people interested in signing up for those units, and flats on 21 is full as we speak. And I think the developer said was the fastest unit that he has, and he's got units in a lot of different communities in the Midwest here, South Dakota, the cities and the like, Rochester, to have that be the case shows some good strength. We also have affordable projects. We had Fox Point come online a couple years ago, 38 units that filled up right away. And then the first and third apartments that I know Taggart can talk on here. Taggart, if you want to take that one, that's a 40-unit project.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So the first and third apartments, that is east of the post office in Austin. We are expecting construction to start probably mid-July. We're just kind of working out the details in there. Three Rivers is the developer. They're the same group that did the Fox Point townhomes. Very aesthetically pleasing. They're a great developer to work with, and we're really looking forward to this. That area is kind of in a targeted area redevelopment between the HRA and the city. And, we've had other projects in that area with like the PRC expansion. So that just builds on that. The other project that we have kind of kicked around in that area is the kind of an infill housing program. We haven't really settled in on exactly what we're going to do there yet, but I'll talk a little bit more about that because that'll be a lead in for Matt and Matthew. A few of the other things we want to talk about on the HRA side is some of the programs we have. We have a program, Greg, if you want to get to the next slide.
I got one before that, Taggart.
Go ahead. That's fine.
Sure, no problem. Just to give folks a sense of the challenges when we're talking about our existing housing stock, 90% of homes in the community were built before 1980. And then 60% of those were before 1960. So it just gives you a sense of how big the problem is of our existing housing stock and why it's a difficult challenge, and one that the counselors of real estate, I think, readily identified. But they, the financial need to utilize existing infrastructure, when we have already one of the biggest costs for development already in place in that core already existing infrastructure and redevelopment, that's a real attractive alternative when we're trying to find a way to fund infrastructure in areas on the outskirts of town. Being able to utilize that existing infrastructure that's already here to our advantage is something we need to look seriously about. Right now, the net gain of new single family homes is about 5, give or take on a given year. But we do have nuisance properties, hazardous structures that we take down. So we're netting about 5. When, as I mentioned before, we need to look at 25 to 30 from the counselors of real estate perspective. We did adopt a rental housing registration and vacant property registration program to try to push the needle and keep the floor from falling out from under us and protecting that housing stock. And I think it's been real effective as we've moved forward. Our minimum housing code adoption, we also did that for existing single owner occupied properties on single family homes, and that's been successful, but a pretty significant effort for our staff to try to tackle that with the magnitude of the problem. It's been real difficult for one individual to try to take that on. That's something that we talked about with council at budget time to try to add an additional person. Our nuisance code, there's a lot of junk and those types of complaints. So those things come hand in hand when we start seeing decreased investment in their property value. Other things like trash and junk and cars up on the blocks become more of an issue that we've had to address. Just to give you a sense of that, in 2022, we had 42 substandard housing violations and over 800 junk and code enforcement points of contact. So just to kind of give you a sense of what we face from the city on an enforcement stand of it. So Taggart.
All right. So a few of the programs the HRA is working with, one of the ones we just actually wrapped up house just this week with Riverland Community College in the electrical program. Each year we build a house with them, and then just a single family home that we put on the market. It's been in that 3 to 350 range. That's been a good program. Not only, are we adding we're adding a house each year, obviously, but the big thing is we're helping train some of the local trades, right? Because that's one of the big issues too, obviously, is workforce. So that's kind of a win-win. These lots where these houses are being developed actually is near that Fox Point development that we had on the slide earlier, that they got developed. There's 9 single family lots that got developed kind of after that Fox Point project. So that kind of came along with that. Next slide, Craig. So CHIP 2 is a program we have. It's the community, I gotta look at my sheet, Community Home Improvement Project. I have a sign in my office, so I always forget that. So that's been a good program. We had the CHIP 1, which was health and safety, whether it's roof or furnaces, but the CHIP 2 was more designed for remodel type projects. We had gotten some Hormel Foundation grant funding, and we dipped in some money as well. That is to kind of, according to our housing study, and like Craig said, there's a lot of aging housing stock. What are we doing to invest in it? And this program is kind of designed to help that, gives people an option. I know a lot with the code enforcement, a lot of people don't have resources. They may have something wrong. They know they have something wrong. What are they going to do to fix it? They don't have all the resources. Where this program comes in handy. Our goal at the area was $1 million fund. We're at 750,000 right now. We're closing in that $1 million goal and hope to expand upon that. It's been a good program. Currently we have 29 active CHIP 2 loans and 36 active CHIP 1 loans. So, and that kind of is the rundown there on the screen. They're both 2% loans. So now back to kind of what I was talking about with the infill program. That's something that we've been looking at. We have some lots in that targeted area redevelopment, and we feel like that's something that could, be good in the community to try to put more affordable housing in some lots and maybe wouldn't necessarily get developed. What that program looks like, we're still kind of trying to figure out. Just kind of had some general discussions with the board, but there's support there. We have 5 lots we're going to kind of do a test pilot with, but I guess that's where I kind of lead to Matt and Matthew. Instead of looking at this an individual lot and what could go there, maybe we need to be looking at a larger scale focus and what that looks like and what questions we should be asking going into something like this.
And I think that dovetails well with what Taggart's saying here. We had a tax abatement project on the last council agenda, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, split level that you see here. The estimated value is $350,000. So when you look at the magnitude of what Taggart's talking about of trying to do an infill, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath isn't exactly spacious nor a lot of bedrooms. This is pretty much your entry level house. So it gives you a sense of the magnitude of what kind of cost developers are looking at. So when we're trying to figure out kind of a new mousetrap, this is kind of some of the parameters that we're dealing with. As far as what Taggart's talking about there too, with the targeted area redevelopment, the city, I think in 2016, we looked at doing a survey of a neighborhood. This is the area from the high school, essentially moving west to Westcott Field. We did a survey of over 500 properties. We worked with Habitat for Humanity and other partners on that. It eventually became kind of overwhelming. But what this middle neighborhood is really trying to accomplish is finding areas in the community that maybe still have some initial blight concerns that are kind of creeping in, but still having a lot of homes that are well taken care of and the like. So how, when we're trying to use limited resources, how can we do that before we get to an area that like Taggart's talking about there with the targeted area redevelopment where there's more widespread blight? Just to give you a sense of the magnitude, in that 500 area surveyed, we had 3% of them showed signs of vacancy, and that helped prompt our vacant housing registration program. 53%, 240 of those didn't need any repairs. But at the same time, 215 or 47% needed one major repair, and then 18% needed 3 or more repairs. So it just gives you a sense of that magnitude of an area where if we can put some resources, targeted resources, to try to catch it before it gets too far gone. That's something that we've looked at internally from the city, and trying to find the resources and personnel to help try to make that happen has been something that we've struggled with. So from there, I'll turn it over to Matt, and stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having us here. My name's Matt Hoffman. I'm an architect and an urban designer. I work about half with municipalities, helping solve issues around housing, and the other half of my work is with kind of a combination of corporate clients and private developers, designing anywhere from a small infill site in a downtown up to a 350-acre corporate campus for companies like Walmart and JB Hunt. This is my partner, Matthew Petty.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you both. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Matthew Petty. I'm in Fayetteville, Arkansas as well, full-time, and I was a council member for almost 13 years down here, working on a variety of issues, but focused on housing and looking for solutions that we could implement quickly without a lot of debate whenever possible. We're just really trying to be as practical as we can about how to do housing with intention, which is the subject of our slides today. We're going to go through these in an expedient manner because we're eager to get to the discussion and any Q&A that comes afterwards. Right up front, I think we want to say, hey, we're outsiders, right? We aren't in Austin. We've never been to Austin. We have been to a lot of cities and towns that are similar to Austin, though, and we want to talk a little bit today about one of the most common themes that we've observed and recognized in communities that are getting it done, that are doing a good job of it. And I think we need to start, after seeing the previous presentation, really by commending your leadership. You know, most cities and towns, the vast majority of them, honestly aren't even interested in studying their challenges and trying to figure out what solutions might exist. So there's already been an incredible amount of work and a huge head start. And I think that needs to be recognized by the community. It's easy for us as outsiders to recognize it because we can compare and contrast it to other places we've been. But it truly is remarkable. And if you're local and you haven't recognized that yet, you know, we would really challenge you to not take it for granted and have some recognition for the work that's already been done.
So this is a diagram that we developed a few years back to describe something that we've seen again and again across the country, which is that most planning efforts fail in one way or another. Mostly they fail to deliver on what was promised. They fail to address the goals that were set out in the beginning. Usually that's because they focus entirely on what's allowable. So they overhaul zoning codes, they overhaul other types of regulations. Obviously, the private market is primarily concerned with what's marketable, but really what gets built is what is convenient, marketable, and allowable. And what we've seen is that typically this area of overlap is either way too small, that is, it's too targeted, and usually targeted on things that aren't core to the planning process, or it might be way too big. So there's just a lack of focus in the development regime around where we're headed, what direction we're trying to get in.
You know, we might say that you don't get what you don't ask for, or maybe because that's hockey country, we might say you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And that's maybe an important lesson, and maybe the first lesson that we think cities and towns really need to learn and internalize. But we would also say that you won't get what you want unless you not just tell people, but set up systems that make what you want the most convenient and easy thing to deliver. And that's especially true when it comes to things that are super complex, like building homes, building a house. That's one of the most complex things you could ask anybody to do. Whenever it comes to that, we think that one of the things people should do is look around their community first. Before you try to find particular solutions or try something new, We find that you get the best results if you're able to make an honest and straightforward assessment of what's already on the ground. And what we have seen in almost every community, and Austin, it appears, is no exception to this. Look around and just count the buildings. Most buildings that are in your community today were built by a lot of individual people, a lot of different people. Now, that's not necessarily how development works today. It's more conventional to see large subdivisions or large apartment complexes, and those are built by one outfit. But if you look at the most historic parts of your community, especially in communities that were principally developed before the 50s or 60s, you see that there are a lot of small projects done by a lot of different people. And I think today you have to put these ideas together where you need large projects to punctuate the rest of the urban fabric and what is there on the ground, but you also need to restore the ability to do a lot of small projects by a lot of different people so that you can get a lot of different variety. We might call that way of doing things incremental development. Here we have a diagram on the screen that came from a community in Texas that we worked with, and this was a typical set of blocks in the project area. Just to note, this is only 3 dwelling units per acre. Now, density is not the most important part of any of these conversations, but we say that now because 3 units per acre is not enough to support a main street. It's not enough to support anything that looks like a transit system or even community institutions without having a lot of parking lots or relying on a lot of people driving in. If you want to have a neighborhood that is kind of self-contained, if you want to do placemaking, if you want to have somewhere that can become more of a destination, whether that's a destination for developers who are looking to do a project or for day trippers who are looking to visit your community or spend a little bit of time there, you have to find a place of doing more with the same amount of land. And incremental development can be one way of doing that that preserves what is already on the ground. In this community, what we did is we studied the existing buildings and we asked people, which buildings do you really like? Which do you really love? What do you cherish? And based on those, we pre-approved a set of buildings that were similar, that were inspired by those buildings that were cherished by the community. Here in this diagram, you can imagine that 5 or 10 years after implementing a program, after starting to take these challenges and opportunities seriously, you would see a little bit of development, but you wouldn't see it changed over, right? These things take time. There's kind of a natural generation when it comes to neighborhood development of something like a decade, maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit longer, but it certainly doesn't happen overnight. You know, there's that adage that it's really easy to overestimate what you could accomplish in 1 year or to underestimate what you might accomplish in 5 years. That's just as true for cities and towns as it is for your personal or your professional development. But if you look at this diagram, I'm going to go back once and forward again. We've already gone from 3 units per acre to 6 units per acre. And this neighborhood still feels familiar. It still feels more or less the same. Once again, we've doubled again. Now we're at something like 12 units per acre, and this is still only with buildings that are similar to the buildings that are already there, right? This isn't tearing down an entire block all at once in order to support a larger project. This isn't anything that is super risky for the neighborhood or for the community. These are buildings that fit into natural placements in the neighborhood that are already there. And you can imagine after a couple of phases of this, the first phase 5 years, the second phase the next 5 years, the third phase the next 5 years, eventually you end up with a neighborhood that is that supports a lot more people and supports a lot more businesses, but also still feels familiar, right? That and even though it feels familiar, it still it produces a tax revenue to support the kinds of infrastructure maintenance that a community needs to do that it obligates itself to.
One thing I want to point out also, as we go back to the earlier parts of this diagram, is that one of the really beautiful things about incremental development is this is primarily single family houses that have been introduced into this neighborhood, which was there before. But it's done in an opportunistic way where actually, as we're introducing buildings, the average size of the project is getting a little bit smaller. So it's not about bringing in this one mega huge project that's going to solve all the problems of the community. It's about doing it incrementally with small buildings that are appropriate and familiar to the neighborhood. So the average project size gets smaller over time.
Now, you might ask yourself, especially if you don't have a lot of permits coming in year after year, who is actually going to build these projects? This is one of the biggest challenges the communities we work with face. If you've ever reviewed any other town's master plan or comprehensive plan, you see that the implementation section usually starts with recommendation number 1, recruit outside developers. And that is a huge challenge in and of itself. For projects like this that are smaller, that have to fit in here and there, you might find some outside developers who are willing to work in that way, to work across scattered sites instead of on one large site. But principally, incremental development needs to be performed by locals who understand how to do it. And if you don't have them there today, it's a huge challenge, but a necessary challenge to solve, to find those people. And how do you find them? Well, you probably already have them, but they need to be activated. So your trades, a carpenter, a plumber, those people are almost ready. They're one step away from deciding to develop small projects like this. Similarly, you've probably got some interested, smart people in your community who drive the streets or walk the streets and they see a piece of property and they say, you know what? Somebody really ought to do something with that piece of property. Well, that somebody is probably them, but they're not able to do that kind of work, or they're discouraged or intimidated from doing that kind of work because it's kind of hard, right? It's chaotic and complex. There are a lot of moving pieces, and that means you have to learn a lot of different things and meet a lot of different people in order to start that. I think this takes us back to one of the main lessons that we've seen and that we've learned and that we try to implement whenever we work with cities and towns, which is it really isn't enough to simply change the laws, and it really isn't enough to simply be excited about something. You actually have to create systems, right, that can be used over and over again by a lot of different people in order to make this sort of thing happen. It's not enough to get started, right? These things have to be created, maintained, and revised along the way. One of the communities we worked with was Claremore, Oklahoma. This is a smaller town, about 17,000 people. It's in the metro region of Tulsa, Oklahoma. They have a local community college and a couple of industries that are headquartered there, but most of the people commute into Tulsa for their day jobs. We did a comprehensive project here. So there was a big planning effort. There was a overhaul of their zoning and land use codes. And we also implemented a pattern zone with pre-approved buildings. We're super proud of this project. They're issuing infill permits now in less than 5 days. Infill projects are often a lot harder than infield projects because they come with different sets of regulations and so on and so forth in most communities. But what we're most proud of with this project is what this new system with the new laws and the pre-approved buildings and other things they implemented, what this new system did for encouraging people to work in downtown instead of in other locations. They've actually had 2 subdivision developers, successful developers, independently come to the planning director there and say, you know what, greenfield infrastructure has always been a major expense, a major headache. We've always figured it out. We have our system for that. And we flirted with the idea of coming downtown, but we never would have until you had this system in place for us. You figured out how to switch over, and now we're going to give it a go. And this is a big deal for Claremore. In the program area, they weren't getting very many permits. They knew they had a need, but they were only getting about a half dozen permits a year. And most of those permits were to tear down a house in disrepair and put up one house back. And it's not a house that is as interesting or as livable as the house that was there before, when that house was in optimum condition, right before it had deteriorated. And the community knew that they were losing something, that they weren't just missing an opportunity to do things a little bit differently, but they were also losing a heritage and a character that they had before, right? And maybe they had lost it somewhere along the way and hadn't noticed. But when they woke up to this, they pursued the establishment of a new system that would work for the kinds of projects they wanted, and they pursued it aggressively. And even after it was implemented, they have stayed on it. So their staff work like marketers to talk about how to use this program, how to access this program, and anybody that comes to Claremore with an inquiry is pitched on how to use these programs and these new opportunities to their mutual advantage.
So it's one thing to say, to have a downtown plan and to say, we want more entertainment options and we want more great restaurants in our downtown. It's one thing to say that, but it's a completely different thing to curate a systems approach that actually increases building permits in downtown and drives that foot traffic that's needed to actually make those businesses work.
One of the things that they recognized right away is that they wanted high quality housing. They wanted building high quality housing to be extremely convenient, and they wanted a lot of options. These images are from another program in Texas that's similar to the Claremore program. And we show these to illustrate one of the most important principles when you're establishing what your intention is for your community. And that's to decide on a theme that is your preferred theme, or maybe it's a set of themes that are your preferred themes, and then to implement a system that supports variations on those themes. So here we have an architectural theme, right? And you can read that in each of these images. We started with the cottage on the left, which is modeled after, once again, a historic home that people in the community identified as a structure that they really liked, that they liked the look of, they cherished having in their community. And from that, we developed these other three variations. These were designed by Matt as the architect on the project. And these are rational variations that aren't just informed by preference, but are also informed by builders' processes and their feedback for what they would be willing and interested to build, what the market would support, and so on and so forth. You have a normal single-story, single-unit cottage on the left. Then you have a garage apartment. Then you have a duplex cottage where you have one unit stacked on top of the other. And then you have a fancier version of the duplex cottage to address other segments of the market that are interested in slightly different things.
So you can see how that fancier version of the cottage might be deployed in a kind of courtyard format on what would have been a small single family lot or a moderate sized single family lot. Now would have more units. But one of the points I want to make here is the fact that we're using design with intention to solve problems that come out in the planning process. So a really good example of that is actually the building just below, the green two-story building. We did a market opportunity summary in this community that concluded that we had two significant pieces of the population that we needed to serve. We had young families who were, sort of needed a first home, and we had a lot of empty nesters. So this building is what we call a flex house. It's a two-story house that can either be an 1,800 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, sort of starter home like you would see for a small family, generous size, or it can flex, and with a small, we call it a 4-digit renovation. You change a pantry into a door around the stairwell. This turns into a duplex. It turns into a 1/1 duplex. So now those empty nesters have a way to downsize in their own home. They can actually rent out the second story to a caretaker, or they can rent it out to someone who pays their bills while they're off vacationing and wherever. Another example of that is this building on the top. Believe it or not, it might look like a single family house, but this is actually a triplex. And this is a building that we designed to solve an issue. This was a college town, and they were getting a lot of what they called stealth dorm, which are basically single family homes in technicality. So these would be 5-bedroom, 5-bath houses where, it only had one kitchen and all the cars would park in the front yard. And it basically turned into Animal House, if you've ever seen that movie. So we introduced this prototype as a way to break down the size of those units and not have as much common gathering space, so that the size of each household was more similar to the other residents in the community. And also we introduced a kind of story and a half design that actually architecturally was more familiar. So again, the idea of using design with intention to solve problems that we understand through the planning process, very important.
I think we would go so far as to say that that's the main lesson is having intention is the first step, and then to repeat ourselves, implementing a repeatable system to preference that intention is the next step. Each of those buildings that you saw was designed in a process that was meant to address a real challenge that the community was struggling with. And the communities did everything that they could to make those the most convenient things to build. So they didn't prohibit any other kind of conventional project. That wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to be prescriptive or to be authoritarian. The goal was to produce a system that matched or exceeded the convenience of doing things a more conventional way. So they didn't just pre-approve those buildings for permits, they also sponsored the use of the plans. So anybody in those communities can access and use those plans, can construct them for free. They just have to pay the regular permit fee to have it processed, just like anywhere else. And then beyond that, when somebody comes in the door and they say, hey, I've got a piece of property and I'm thinking about doing something, it's not here, read a zoning code and figure it out and come back to us with your concept and we'll work with you from there. It's even easier than that. You know, they say we can do this that way, or you can select something out of this catalog and we'll work with you to make sure that you get your permit as fast as possible and you can start right away. So you can imagine if you put yourself in the shoes of some kind of an amateur, right, who is just thinking somebody ought to do something with that property. Maybe you have a small inheritance or a savings and you think this is the project for you to do the next thing in your life, how hard it might be to get started. They try to take away all those barriers as well, right? And so there's still more that communities like this can do. The financing piece, the labor market piece, all of these are still huge challenges for delivering small scale housing, but at scale, a lot of permits on a lot of different sites. But whenever if you're a city or a community like Austin and you're thinking, how can we set an intention? How can we change our community's mindset from an anything goes attitude to a we know what we want and that's what we're going to ask for attitude? That to build on that and create a system that actually implements this and gives you extra tools besides simple marketing can be the next step that convinces, that entices developers to come to you and to do what you want. We'd love to, let's get into the discussion. That's it for our slides.
So I'll throw out a first level prompt, and Craig, you mentioned and showed the map of the city, and those areas of potential housing seem to be primarily focused on the outskirts of town, and yet you also talked about the necessity for intentional infill. What are some of the challenges that you're currently seeing, and Taggart, you as well, within the city of Austin, of the type of developers that are coming in? Do you find them more used to greenfield development in the outskirts of town? And do you feel like you have enough folks outside of Taggart that can understand and be good infill developers, right? So that's the first question for you guys, is the marketplace of developers. Are they more used to greenfield and pushing that out there? Or do you have people on the ground that actually understand that urban infill to be able to help you with that next level discussion of infill?
Yeah, it's been the greenfield development. The biggest challenge there is the, houses and the value of the houses in a redevelopment area. As I showed on the earlier slide there, a $350,000 entry level home, placing that next to say $100,000 home can be a challenged investment for a private developer. So that's why I think we've generally seen them move to the outskirts of town. But then, as I mentioned as well, the infrastructure costs are notable and a big challenge for developers to try to make the numbers work on that as well. So, where's the right role for the city to play in incentivizing and tipping the scale towards those infill developments? I think that's part of our conversation that we need to have going forward here with those on the call and those in the community here.
So
I will say
go
too,
ahead.
I just looked this up, our median household income is 54,000. So that new family, the brand new construction, single family home is out of reach for the majority of our residents based on just their income. So we already know those outskirts and those developments of brand new single family homes leave a big gap. I think that's where the question mark is.
Mhm. And Laura, I think that's a really great thing. And that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, because you have two needs, at least Craig and Tager, what I've heard so much. You have those that are coming in that are the great jobs exist. You have a major corporation. They're struggling to find homes that they can live into and buy within that structure. And then you also have, to your point, Laura, folks that live in the community that are also struggling to find. So it's a need of a both and, right? How do you have more market rate? At the same time, how do you generate housing that are the starter homes, can get people in, so they're not dealing with that? And so I throw that question out, then Craig, Taggart, Matt, and Matthew. I mean, we're dealing with that concept of gentrification, in which, we know that there's folks out there that talk about that, Monty Anderson and a few other peoples out there, where it's gentrification, that those that have property need to participate in that value creation, right? So it's not an outside person coming in, buying cheap homes and then flipping them into more expensive homes, and thus kind of messing with the integrity of the neighborhood. And yet, Taggart, we talked earlier about that idea of what role do your projects play, because you're very focused on attainable, affordable, correct? I mean, that's sort of the goal of that. So how do you see that mix happening so you don't create pockets of attainable, affordable housing, which comes with a lot of other issues, spreading that out, making sure that everybody has nice housing, that it's close proximity to the services, because you put them on the outskirts of town, now they have to have cars, which impact affordability. So talking about that mix, Taggart and Craig, and then Matt and Matthew, if you guys have some things that you've seen perhaps that might be able to tackle that. So Taggart and Craig, why don't you guys start with that question?
I wouldn't mind tackling, you talk about infill. We did a project. We moved a new house into a lot that we had donated. It was in a nice area of town, but the home values were not, not high. But we added a very nice house. We built a garage on it. We worked with Riverland on building the garage. It was a lot we had gotten donated, and the labor and everything to get this house was free. We broke even for what our costs. So when you talk about trying to find developers on the, for infield, that's going to be the struggle. We had zero labor costs and a lot given to us, and we're breaking even. So, I mean, there is a struggle there. So from an HRA standpoint, that's where I see our role a little bit, is because the private market's not going to take on some of these things. We can't do it of the scale that we probably everyone would want, but you got to start somewhere and try to see if that model will work, I guess, is the approach we've been looking at.
And take it to follow up, Laura also added that this strategy is great. Can we scale it and do it 10 plus a year? What would it take to scale a project like the one you're talking about?
Well, I mean, we're too early in this. The one we did was an opportunity that came up. We did it. I mean, we had a lot of things go in our favor. So, a lot of planning. I mean, we have lots now that we're looking at that. Do I have the answers of what that would take? No, but I'm looking into it. I mean, we're going to try to at least do 5 and see what happens.
And I think this gets into a segue to Matt and Matthew, moving from parcel to parcel and more at the neighborhood scale, and understanding how the neighborhood functions as part of this conversation. So you're not just doing one project and then another project. So Matt and Matthew, addressing this from sort of that urban planning neighborhood scale, specifically as it relates to your pattern zone thing, can you maybe speak to moving from the parcel conversation into a much more sort of neighborhood strategic level on addressing some of the issues that Taggart has talked about and Craig has talked about?
Yeah, I'll let Matthew take the scale question, because I think that's a really interesting piece of this. I do want to address one comment though about the kind of difference in value between new construction and some of these kind of redevelopment ready areas. We see this a lot, and this is a really common issue with what we call one-to-one conversions, where you've got a house that maybe it's on a street where every house is worth $80,000-$100,000, and new construction being worth, being what it is, you end up with a $300,000-$400,000 house at the end. If you're only doing one house per lot, in other words, if you're going back in with the same development pattern that was there before, the opportunity becomes, as we talked about in the incremental development diagram, trying to find ways to, well, maybe we subdivide this lot, maybe we create a bungalow court instead of just a bungalow, or maybe it's a townhouse court instead of a single townhouse. And now we're able to divide that land cost by X. We're able to divide the construction costs by X, and we end up with something that maybe it's it's not $400,000, maybe it's $250,000. You can't ever get all the way back down to zero. So it's new construction is always going to be a little bit more expensive, but the more you can divide that core cost, the better you're going to do in the end. And the benefit there is that you increase the numbers, you increase the comps, and so you're starting to make traction much more quickly than if you're just doing things kind of one at a time.
Great answer. And to follow up, when we see communities that are trying to improve an existing neighborhood or bring new developments to existing neighborhoods that are struggling or have houses in disrepair, we see one theme in all those communities that are doing this successfully, and it's simply this: the efforts are concentrated and then they're spread out. So if you're looking at an 8 to 10 block area, for instance, concentrate efforts on 1 or 2 blocks, say for the first 4 or 5 years. That means rehab dollars go there. That means new construction dollars go there. That means planning efforts go there. That means having a concierge or a liaison relationship for builders and your planners, et cetera, all goes in that area. Your marketing efforts go there. And the idea is that one house on a street that needs a lot of help is not enough, but 3 new projects is enough. There's a rule of thumb here where there's a threshold, and if you can't cross the threshold, then you won't achieve the results you're hoping for. But once you cross it, then you have momentum, and it's not just you making promises or commitments or expressing hopes. Now you have a market trend, right? And that becomes something of its own, with its own spirit. It becomes something that developers and builders see and want to be a part of. So we've seen this happen in a lot of communities. This was one of the main lessons of Claremore, is they really concentrated their efforts in what's called the Old Town district of the city. I've seen this in Kalamazoo, a little bit closer to y'all. I worked with a community, East Cleveland in Ohio. East Cleveland is the 4th most impoverished city in the country. Most of the fabric there is literally ruins. With buildings that are falling apart, with vines growing through the windows, they're abandoned, and so on and so forth. And that community has had success in attracting builders into one particular district. They identified one neighborhood, and for a period of 10 years, they put all of their as many community investment dollars, infrastructure dollars, et cetera, into one particular area. They called it the East Cleveland target area. And they didn't just have a plan or a hope. They demonstrated through their pocketbooks and through all their activities that they were committed to this vision for the East Cleveland target area. And that is really what they sold, right? That is really what they talked to builders and developers about. It wasn't just, we're looking for people who are going to do this. It was, we aren't going to stop. We have started. We will not give up. We are completely 100% committed. We will die on this hill until the very end. We are going to push as hard as we can to get this done. And what the builders and developers who they were able to entice, to convince to come to the East Cleveland target area, the reasons they decided to do that all came down to that conviction, right? That no nonsense, we're never going to stop attitude that they made apparent through those interactions time and time again. They never let off of it.
Yeah, really love that proof of concept. I mean, we made a lot of investments down around the post office with the 40 unit that's coming online, the Parenting Resource Center. I mean, we forget the Parenting Resource Center was a dilapidated house / hotel that was a tremendous blight on the community. To put those kind of resources to bear is really powerful. Even the ones, they weren't necessarily as targeted, but the proof of concept for our market rate developers, to show developers that there is a market rate multifamily that can be successful in a community, which went against a lot of common perceptions, is really changing the game, and that reinvigorating the private marketplace to help. And then partnering that with what Laura's talking about there, that middle neighborhood, trying to keep the areas from falling into further decline, putting some resources towards that naturally affordable occurring affordable housing is just really critically important to help keep. It's a both and strategy with trying to add new units that you're mentioning here, and then keeping our existing housing stock. Every time we add value to our existing housing stock, the gap between what the market value is of those homes and new construction becomes smaller, and then more attainable, that we'll actually see that private market take over and help solve our problem. That's really our only hope to digging ourselves out of this hole, is to make those strategic investments and having the private market take hold. So those are some great examples of targeting those resources, Matt.
So I throw this out knowing that we have 6 minutes left, and Craig, you've heard me talk about this, that catalytic triad, the role of the government, the role of the nonprofit sector, and the role of the private market. And it takes all three to move the needle on issues like this. It isn't just Taggart's job or your job or city council's job. So real quickly, sort of in a nutshell, ask each one of you sort of, what do you see the role, the proper role of the municipality in this conversation of housing? We'll start with you, Craig. Then Taggart, what do you see as the proper role of the nonprofit sector, sort of the world you inhabit within this conversation? And Matt and Matthew, kind of completing this, what is the role of sort of the private market institutions, including banks? Because banks are a big part of this when it comes to financing these types of projects. So Craig, in a sort of a nutshell, what is the role of the municipality and the government within this conversation, the proper role?
Well, I think the regulatory structure is always something that we want to look at. Developing a comprehensive plan is something that we're looking at redoing going forward to provide that structure that you've talked about on a lot of instances, both here and other talks that we've done. So we have that as part of our strategy. As far as council is concerned, single family home creation is a huge priority, and we want to figure out, what do we need to do to put our finger on the scale to go from no to go? How do we get projects that can move forward and add and help with our workforce challenges, having housing to be able to help support our private industry? That's what we're really focused on.
Okay. Taggart, what do you see the role of the nonprofit sector in this conversation?
Well, from my end, I feel like some of these projects get started on a smaller scale so they can get scalable, prove that they work, so we can scale them out and see what that looks like. May or may not work, but try to prove that it works.
Okay, all right. And Matt and Matthew, from the private market standpoint, sort of what do you see the role, not just from private developer, you're talking about the whole private market that needs to play a role in this. What specific role do you think that private market plays in answering some of these questions and challenges?
So we could talk a lot, if we have more time, talk about a lot of different specific programs or maybe industry specific, depending on which industry we're talking about. But to sum all those up in the most succinct manner possible, we would say believe in every project concept that comes in the door from day one, and try to be a steward for those projects. So for example, if you have somebody come into the bank and they've never done a duplex before, but that's what they want to do, and they have the concept in mind, believe in them. Don't write them off just because it's a small deal, right? And make sure that you do what you can to be a steward for those projects with everybody, with finding additional capital, with working with the city to make sure that that vision is executed in the best manner possible. Like all projects, not just real estate, but all projects share this. All projects that are done well have to be managed well, right? And that really takes a team effort. And you have to realize that you're not just there to provide a service, to do one part of this, but you're there to be part of the team and to do really everything you can to go above and beyond your one-page job description to do whatever it takes to get the project finished.
Mm-hmm. And I know there's also a big conversation about immigrant support and a large portion of the population in Austin. And I think we've shared this numerous times over multiple projects, Matt and Matthew, this idea that ownership is agency. So how do you build ownership into this versus just renters or other people, right? And so this is truly a financial conversation. This is a community development conversation. This is a placemaking conversation. This is a talent and retention conversation. This is economic development. And it's going to take an entire system to move the needle on this and to address things that Laura brought up, that Craig brought up, Taggart, and you guys. So in the last couple minutes, Craig, you think about the next 6 months. What are 2 things that you want to see happen in the next 6 months that you feel can move the needle on this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, going back to the counselors of real estate, there are over 20 recommendations that communities of practice can come together and help us prioritize that list and what we can work forward. And then addressing both the comprehensive plan and downtown master plan over the, that's not a quick process. We'd have budget discussions with council on that and look to do that. Prepare for it, but get ready to do that after the first of the year, and updating that and how that dovetails with basically all the elements that we've talked about here and built on through the velocity group efforts here that we've done.
Cool. Taggart, what are 2 things from your world that you want to see happen in the next 6 months that would help you do what it is you're doing?
I'd like to get 5 houses. Challenge me to do 10. Well, it's 6 months. Let's do 5. No, try to get that off the ground. See what that looks like.
Okay. And what is one
40-unit apartment complex up and going as well.
So thinking about those 5 houses, what is one thing that you think you need to help get that scalability to 5 houses? What's the one challenge you want to throw out there to the community?
I think I said in the messages, available builders, and then that price point, the cost, right? I mean, we want to be able to at least somewhat break even. So.
Okay. All right. Well, hey guys, it's 1 p.m. Want to respect everybody's time. The great thing about why we do these speaker series is you guys also get relationships with great folks from around the country who are trying to help communities like yours tackle these issues. So Matt Hoffman and Matthew Petty, thank you guys so much for jumping on the call and sharing your experience and your scars of doing this work all over the place. Taggart, thank you so much. It's been awesome to hear about all the work that you've been doing, and so appreciate all the work you've been doing in Austin, and thank you for sharing that. And then Craig, thank you also for jumping on, city administrator. You're tackling an awful lot of things, and of course housing is just one of them, but you of all people know this is a systems issue. So appreciate that. As a reminder to everyone, we do record these sessions and then we do upload them. We're going to be actually putting up all the sessions in the speaker series up on the Impact Austin website, which we'll be able to announce pretty soon what that URL is. And so then you can share them with as many constituents as possible. And I'll leave you with this, is that this is always about the first step of a conversation. You need to start taking these conversations in the coffee houses and the tables of your homes and calling up your elected officials and saying that this is really, really important, because it isn't just about a couple people. It takes a village, to use that rather ubiquitous and hackneyed term, but it's true to do this. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And I wish you all the best and have a wonderful week.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.